Hi colleagues, this is John Fischetti and Jess Harris.
Hi.
Welcome to week 2 of EDUC 6350. We hope you've had a good start to the course and that you've gotten to know each other a little bit and gotten through the first reading and conversation about that reading. So now we're in week 2, we're looking ahead to week 3, and we have 2 assignments for this week. As mentioned, we'll be chunking out some smaller point value assignments through the early part of this course on our way to 2 major assessment tasks. The first is a annotated bibliography around a topic you'll be picking in just a few weeks. That topic will be something about change that you've been part of in your school or that your school may be investigating, or if you're not in a school, something your organization is investigating that's designed to accomplish an outcome. Following that assessment task, you'll then be presenting that as the last big thing that we do. The trouble with most change efforts and the most processes that we go through in education in particular is we often jump in and just make change happen. We haven't reckoned with our values and our beliefs, the framework that we bring, the research that might be already available, even our values as we might not have formalized them. So we're going to ask you to start there this week with a philosophy statement about what you believe about leadership, what you believe about change, and sort of who you are as you bring that to the mix. So we're going to ask you to start with a blank slate. Unless you've done this in a prior course in our program, you're welcome to bring that draft and think of this as a first go at understanding what it might be to take all the ideas that are out there, many of which come from a lot of good thinking over many, many, many years of work, and present that to us and to each other. And to kick that off, we're going to each share just a little bit orally of the kind of dialogue we'd like you to have in writing. And Jess is going to share a little bit about her philosophy of leading and change with us, and then I'll do the same. And we hope that'll give you a perspective of what we might be looking for.
Thanks, John. In terms of my philosophy of leadership and of education and around change, which is one of the main areas that I'm interested in, I kind of look at it in 2 separate ways. First of all, there's my student-centered thoughts, which are around providing equity, providing support, and reaching those students who are particularly and historically have been at disadvantage, whether that's because of race, gender, socioeconomic status, or for any other reason, that just that education hasn't reached them in a way that it possibly could. My teacher-centered view and how I have worked to try and achieve those goals is to provide teachers and school leaders with the skills and the tools in order to investigate their own practices, to look at things in different ways, to prompt changes or disrupt current ways of doing things, and realize that if we keep doing the things that we've always done, the results aren't going to change, and those ingrained disadvantages are going to be perpetuated. So really that's kind of something that I like working with, thinking about things critically and in different ways, and thinking about how that can be done in organisations which are highly complex and involve people and multiple views, and realising that this is never a simple task. We can't really come at it with well, this works and we can roll it out throughout multiple contexts. John?
Good, that's great. So you see, to get a sense of putting something light out there for your beliefs would be very helpful. Here's a spin on mine, and again, it's presumptuous to ask people to do a philosophy because it's a moving target, but it's also really crucial we do that because all of our decisions are made by the values we bring to those decisions. As an educational leader, I've run organizations both large and small. I've run schools and organizations in higher ed, and obviously we all work inside of organizations, even if it's our own company and we're the sole proprietor. We work inside our own mind. My philosophy of leadership starts with the classic literature in educational leadership, and I'm not sure any of you may have read it at this point. Actually, it's a relatively new field. 1939, a guy by the name of Kurt Lewin, who was a psychologist, actually sort of came up with schemas to understand leadership from a psychological point of view. So if you think that educational leadership is a new field, it actually is if you think about it less than 100 years. Lewin, in his writing, and his writing about people's behavior, really came up with 3 different domains of leadership. Authoritative, that's I'm in charge and you're not, any questions, right? That's top-down, dictatorial, authoritative leadership. Some of you may claim that the schools you work in now are run that way. Most of the educational literature and research would tend to lend itself to not recommend authoritative as the domain for your philosophy, but we'll get to that later in the course. The second is democratic. Democratic would be as participatory as possible, where people who are members of the organization believe that they have input and actually voice. And you would see that a lot of the gurus that you may be writing about that have influenced your philosophy, maybe professional learning, maybe other courses have espoused upon, might be motivating to you. So authoritative, democratic, and then there's one which I'm fairly used to being a part of in schools I've taught in, and that's laissez-faire. In many ways, it's a delegative responsibility where the principal gives the authority to the deputies, or that basically is very hard to find and is never really there. You could never get an email or a conversation back. So as Lewin organized these in 1939, minus the email part at the time, he sort of framed that there were authoritative, democratic, and laissez-faire, passive leaders. We'd like you to think about whether that construct works for you. You're not required to use Lewin at all, just to kind of know that he created it. My own personal spin for my own writing to this, and I probably already exceeded the word count, is really much more situational leadership. That sometimes we really have to be in an ongoing situation where we try to be as democratic and participatory as possible, but we really want to trust and not micromanage. But if there's an emergency, quite often you might have to go to the authoritative point of view. So anyway, I would write writing around Lewin, framing it in Lewin, and understanding that ultimately, whatever leadership style we bring to it, whatever philosophy we bring, has to be couched in what Jess was discussing, that our goal is that every child learns and masters the key content of what schools are supposed to be about, but that we make decisions as educators that give them the differentiated resources to do that, because every child is a precious different learner and doesn't come at it the same exact way as her neighbor sitting next to her in class. And this notion that schools are places that young people go to watch teachers work has to be replaced by this equity-based approach that we give students what they need in order for them to master the content and lead inspired lives. So in all of that, with an editing tip, would be some summary thoughts about coming up with my philosophy using Lewin and an equity lens that we bring to the conversation. All right, so we hope our two examples get you to know us a little bit more, as well as give you a sense of what you'd be writing for this first task this week. But think of it as a draft. Don't be worried and intimidated by it. We will actually come back to that at the end of the semester, and you'll be making revisions as we go through it. So don't look at it as a final process. Look at it as a work in progress.
And if you have any questions, feel free to post them on discussion board. That's your primary mode for questions, because if you've got the question, chances are that there are other people wondering the same things about the task. Or otherwise you can feel free to email John and I.
Yep. All right, so we're going to move to the other task due for week 3, and Jess will take us through that now.
Okay, so the other task for week 3, as John said, was part of thinking about philosophy. Your philosophy as an educational leader is thinking about the purpose of schooling, what schools should be for, what are we actually trying to achieve. Now what we've done with this task is we've broken it up and broken the readings up into 3 different groups. We're thinking about some of the big issues, big themes that are facing education at the moment. One of those is the global testing agenda and global accountability, and the idea of global comparisons across educational systems. One is the idea of deschooling. Do we even need schools as an institution, as a place, as a building that kids go to each day? And the final one is looking at the global movement of education ideas, what can be called the GERM, the Global Education Reform Movement, and how there are global shifts across education structures. We want you to choose an area that you think might be of interest to you. Engage in the reading. Some of those include some TED Talks or some videos, to think about those as prompts or provocations to come up with your own thoughts on what are the purposes of schooling. And we want you to work with your colleagues in discussion boards. We'll set up a discussion board for each of those 3 areas for you to engage in conversations prompted by those readings and videos.
So if you do both of these assessments, these are mini assessments. This is not as large as it seems. It's one of those, I call them Nike assignments, just do it. Both of these are related to developing your philosophy and then also picking which of these areas you want to write about and get inside that discussion group in our course. Many students about now, if they're new to postgraduate, say, how much time should I commit to a postgraduate course? And generally, in a live course where there's a 2.5 to 3 hour lecture and tutorial once a week with follow-up readings and assignments, there was some sense to that. But in the online world, how many hours should you be devoting? The answer is between 6 and 10. And so since we don't actually meet live, and you don't have to come from the car park to find us in the Hunter building here at Callahan and Newcastle, so think about the time frame there. And if you're spending that amount of time, you'll be doing well. There'll be some weeks to do a little less, very few weeks to do a little bit more. But the readings and the writings really will frame us getting to the heart of the course, which will be you figuring out what you want to determine you've been doing in your school or watching happening in your school, and see if that's been going properly. If we jump straight to that, we'll be doing and committing the faux pas that happens too many times, where we just assess things, not really our values, our goals, our desires for our children and society have not been really thought through. And as a leader, we think that will set you apart, that you're a values-driven, learning-centered leader who's there for every child, not just somebody who takes something from the professional development opportunity and puts into practice, not asking, is it even good for the learners that we're attempting it to be for? So hopefully this video has given you a little bit of the method to our madness, and with the two smaller assessment tests this week, you'll be jumping right in.
Thanks, and we'll see you in week 3.